Hello and welcome to week 2. This week we're going to jump into the topic of compliance, laws, and ethics. And so in this chapter you will learn about the application of laws and ethics to the information security environment, various U.S. laws and their relation to information security will be discussed, as are international laws that apply to the global organizations. So our objectives for this week and this particular chapter, you should, after reading the chapter and listening to the lectures and completing the exercises that's out there for you, you should be able to differentiate between laws and ethics, describe the ethical foundations and approaches that underline modern codes of ethics. You should also be able to identify significant national and international laws that relate to the practice of information security. Discuss relevant professional organizations and their role and relationship to organizational information security. So, information security and the law. Laws and their relationship to ethics. We're going to note that laws are largely drawn from the ethics of a culture. Ethics should be noted as being based on cultural morals, which are fixed moral attitudes or customs of a societal group. But we also need to know the need for information security professionals and managers to have a rudimentary grasp of the legal framework within which their organizations operate. So we've already covered this one, and I'll try to keep up with my own slides. So, as a future information security professional, you will be required to understand the scope of an organization's legal and ethical responsibilities. When I was an information assurance manager for the government, and even when I was a contractor on the DoD side as a systems administrator, there were a lot of laws and ethics and compliances and guidelines that we had to adhere to. And you must know those frontwards and backwards. Those guides and policies basically become your Bible, if you will. So, why study the compliance laws and ethics? Well, to minimize the organization's liabilities, the information security practitioner must understand the current legal environment and keep apprised of new laws, regulations, and ethical issues as they emerge. And basically, as you educate your employees and management about their legal and ethical obligations and the proper use of information technology and information security, security professionals can keep an organization focused on its primary objectives. And so basically, when it says stick to the objectives, stick with the playbook. Don't go outside the scope. Don't go outside. Trying other frameworks and compliances to make it fit your organization. And so, information security professionals and managers involved in information security must possess a rudimentary grasp of the legal framework within which their organizations operate. And so you've already heard some of these that I've already mentioned at the first, but I'll jump down to the last point here, or one of the last points on this page. All management, specifically information security professionals, are expected to act in compliance with legal requirements when collecting, storing, and using information. And so we're going to get into the types of laws. Constitutional law that originates with the United States Constitution, a state constitution or local constitution, bylaws, or charter. A statutory law originates from a legislative branch specifically tasked with the creation and publication of laws and statutes. Now, regulatory or administrative law, that originates from an executive branch or authorized regulatory agency and includes executive orders and regulations. So let's back up and talk about the statutory law. Originates from the legislative branch. So basically this is something that Congress will publish, and it's a directive straight from them. And so when you're dealing with compliance laws and ethics and information security, if it's a statutory law, you can't bypass it. You can't get a waiver. You must comply with it. And so like a regulatory or administrative law, this one says it comes from the executive branch. You know, that's basically the office of the presidency. And so those you can receive a waiver. And so if it's there, like if your organization is new and it's young and there's certain laws that say, okay, this is a regulatory law or an administrative law, do we need to comply? Well, yes, we do, but we can at this stage of the game. And so by doing that, you can actually receive a waiver by going through the proper channels. But now if it says it's a statutory law, there's no way around it. You have to do it. So let's move down here to common law, case law, and precedent. That originates from a judiciary branch or oversight board and involves the interpretation of law based on the actions of previous and or higher court or board. So basically, let's say common law or common case and precedent. Let's say somebody goes to trial and you know their organization was wronged, or they thought was wronged by a regulation or a regulatory administrative law. And thinking it was unconstitutional, well then, you know, they go to court, and if, you know, the court decides in favor of the company, then they have set precedent over that regulatory or administrative law. And so that's what it's talking about here. And so within statutory law, one can further divide laws into their association with individuals, groups, and the state. So basically, civil law embodies a wide variety of laws pertaining to relationships between and among individuals and organizations. Civil law includes contract law, employment law, family law, and tort law. Tort law is the subset of civil law that allows individuals to seek redress in the event of personal, physical, and financial injury. And so criminal law addresses violations harmful to society and is actively enforced and prosecuted by the state. So criminal law addresses statutes associated with traffic law, public order, property damage, and personal damage. And so let's talk about the relevant U.S. laws. You know, I want to explain to you that the United States has led the development and implementation of information security legislation to prevent misuse and exploitation of information and information technology. And you know, there are certain U.S. federal laws relevant to information security, such as the Federal Trade Commission Act, which is FTCA, and the Freedom of Information Act, the FOIA. And then we'll also discuss the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act of 1986, which is CFA, and note that it was basically amended in 1996 by the National Information Infrastructure Protection Act, which increased penalties for selected crimes, and that the penalty under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, the latest one, 1996, depends on the value of information obtained, whether the offense is judged to be committed for one or the following reasons. So, A, the purposes of commercial advantage, B, private financial gain, and C, in in the furtherance of a criminal act. And so the Computer Fraud Act was further modified by the U.S. Patriot Act of 2001, which provided law enforcement agencies with additional capabilities to fight terrorist-related activities. And so the Computer Security Act of 1987, which was introduced to help protect federal computer systems by establishing minimum acceptable security practices. And so basically the Computer Security Act, through that, agencies such as the National Bureau of Standards and the National Security Agency were developed out of these. And so the Computer System Security and Privacy Advisory Board, which is established by the Computer Security Act as a board that identifies emerging managerial, technical, administrative, and physical safety issues relative to computer systems, security, and privacy. And I would like to note that the Computer Security Act amended the Federal Property and Administrative Services Act of 1949, requiring that the National Bureau of Standards distribute standards and guidelines pertaining to federal computer systems. And you also need to be aware of the fact that one of the provisions within the Computer Security Act requires any employee involved in the management, use, or operation of federal computer systems to undergo mandatory periodic training in computer security awareness. And that's always an important point. Somebody says, well, how do you keep down security risk in your organizations? Well, my immediate thought is to educate the workforce on what help them define what phishing is, help them to identify scams through email, those type things that would basically become an insider threat, because if let's say a common user or an employee decides to venture out to a website that has been hacked or has tools that would attach to your computer, by IP address, and or you open a macro or you open a virus in your email, then now that has become a local issue inside your network that you have to mitigate. So training the workforce, in my opinion, is one of the best ways to defend against insider threats or basically making the mistakes that would be detrimental to your organization. And so in this day and age, there's also increased use of databases that store confidential information or personal information, and explain and I just want basically explain that the increased pressure on governments to protect individual privacy. We all know about the PII, which is personally identifiable information, and if you work with the government or the DoD, they're sticklers for that, as well as they should be. So privacy laws define privacy as the state of being free from unsanctioned intrusion, and would also note how this relates to the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution. And so we're also going to talk about the privacy of customer information law, which prohibits the sale of proprietary information and use of such information for marketing purposes, for common criteria, or for common carriers. And also, on a side note, that this law prevents disclosure of information except when necessary to provide service or by customer request. advance our slides here. Okay, so I think we've covered that. So here are some relevant U.S. laws. We mentioned some of these as I talked, and again, I didn't keep up with the slides like I should have. So the Online Commerce and Information Protection, that's the Federal Trade Commission Act, FTCA. As you can see, the area, the act, the year it was implemented, and basically a description of the law. You guys should be familiar with this one, the privacy of student information. Just like Athens State University, I'm not allowed to comment on your grades or your status unless I have written permission from you. So basically that's what we call FERPA, Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, 20 U.S. Code. You can see all that garbage that Congress adds to what the law is. As you can see, the copyright areas there, there's the cryptography, unlawful access to stored communications, Computer Fraud Act, we've talked about that, the Computer Security Act 1987, and I advanced slides too fast. So you're looking at the Security and Freedom through Encryption Act, and then there's the No Electronic Theft Act, amend 17 U.S. Code 506A, and basically these parts of the U.S. Code amend copyright and criminal statutes to provide greater copyright protection and penalties for electronic copyright infringement. As you can see, there are tons of laws that you need to be familiar with as an information security manager. You're not going to be able to know these overnight. Some of these appear to run together at times, and so sometimes on certification test or even an exam, you may be asked which law is appropriate to apply. And so it could be the U.S. Patriot Act, could be the Computer Security Act, and so anyway, there's things that you need to learn. As you can see, we've mentioned some of this already, from the notes. All this can be found in your book. So one thing I'd like to note on this slide, right down here at the bottom, privacy in this context is not absolute freedom from observation. Rather, it is defined as state of being free from unsanctioned intrusion. And so when we talk about privacy laws, and especially when you work with the government, go in with the frame of mind that there is no expectation of privacy. So don't think because you're using that computer that it's solely yours. No, it belongs to the government, or it belongs to the DoD contractor that you work for, or even if you work for a commercial company, that belongs to them. And those computer systems can be subject to investigation at any time. So the way I tell my folks, and I coach youth league baseball and high school football and baseball, I tell the kids, if you wouldn't say it to your mama or do something like that to your mama, then don't put it on Facebook, don't put it in email, don't put it in writing, or do something that's unethical. Because if you wouldn't do it to your mom, then you certainly wouldn't want to do it to your company. It puts your company in jeopardy and could cause a lot of harm, even though it may not have been intentional on your part to be that way. So the Federal Privacy Act of 1974 regulates the government's use of private information and was created to ensure that government agencies protect the privacy of individuals and businesses' information and make them responsible if any portion of this information is released without permission. And so the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, ECPA, of 1986 is a collection of statutes that regulates the interception of wire, electronic, or oral communication. So basically we're talking about wiretapping here. These statutes work in cooperation with the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, which prohibits search and seizure without a warrant. And as you know, over the past few years, there's always been lawsuits saying the government's overstepped their bounds because they were listening for terror organizations and cells. They're trying to pick up communications there, but also in the meantime, there are common everyday citizens that may cross paths through the communications, and so are these people being targeted unlawfully and that kind of stuff. So you can do a lot of research and find that where a lot of people don't like this particular act, and basically a lot of people say that they're trampling on the Fourth Amendment rights. And we've talked about HIPAA. You can't go to a doctor's office without filling out 50,000 pages of paperwork, and one of them that you sign is like, okay, this is my medical records, and I know you're not going to give them out unless I designate on this paper who can. Like for me, my wife has access to my medical records. ARRA and HITECH. Enacted in 2009, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act was designed to provide a response to the economic crisis in the United States. It was specifically focused on providing tax cuts and funding for programs, federal contracts, grants, and loans. With Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health, HITECH Act, enacted as part of ARRA and in cooperation with HIPAA, also requires that covered entities notify information owners of breaches. So in other words, if a doctor's office or say Blue Cross Blue Shield or whatever is hacked, then they're obligated to contact you as a customer, since they may have medical information and privacy information on you. And if it's determined that you're part of the data that had been breached, then by law they have to contact you and let you know. You'll see this a lot. The Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act of 1999. It's the Financial Services Modernization Act, or Gramm-Leach-Bliley GOB Act of 1999, contains a number of provisions that affect banks, security firms, and insurance companies. So these folks have certain guidelines they have to go by. It requires all financial institutions to disclose their privacy policies, describing how they share non-public personal information, and describing how customers can request that their information not be shared with third parties. It also ensures that the privacy policies in effect in an organization are fully disclosed when a customer initiates a business relationship, and distributed at least annually for the duration of the professional association. Export and espionage laws. Wow, these can actually get pretty serious. And so basically with the Economic Espionage Act, the EEA, is basically developed to protect intellectual property and competitive advantage. And so in 1996, Congress enacted the Economic Espionage Act, EEA. Basically, it was there to protect trade secrets from the foreign government that uses its classic espionage apparatus to spy on a company, to the two American companies that are attempting to uncover each other's bid proposals, or to disgruntled former employees who walk out walks out of his or her former company with a computer diskette full of engineering schematics. Well, not necessarily a diskette, maybe a thumb drive or a DVD of information. The Security and Freedom through Encryption Act of 1997 provides guidance on the use of encryption and institutes measures of public protection from government intervention. It basically reinforces an individual's right to use or sell encryption algorithms without concern for the impact of the other regulations requiring some form of key registration. It also prohibits the federal government from requiring the use of encryption for contracts, grants, and other official documents and correspondence. I'm not going to talk too much about the U.S. copyright law. Most of you have heard this, and most of you sort of know it's a lot of common sense that applies to it. You know, if you watch a DVD or if you buy one from the store, you're not supposed to rip that DVD or make a copy of it and resell it. You don't want to infringe on somebody's copyright laws. Basically, you're selling something that's not yours. The Freedom of Information Act, you hear that a lot, to where public officials, all their emails are public, or their electronic emails or electronic traffic and documents are subject to the Freedom of Information Act, and by law they have to disclose that. Now, the Sarbanes-Oxley (SOX) Act of 2002 basically enforces accountability for the financial record keeping and reporting at publicly traded corporations. And so it requires that the CEO and Chief Financial Officer, CFO, assume direct and personal accountability for the completeness and accuracy of a publicly traded organization's financial reporting and record-keeping systems. And you can read here about the breach laws. Now, I'm going to touch on this a little bit. A lot of us nowadays, many of us don't write checks, and if you're like me, you don't carry cash anywhere with you. So you use a debit card or use a credit card. And so the PCI DSS, the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, is a set of industry standards that are mandated for any organization that handles credit, debit, and specialty payment cards in an effort to reduce credit card fraud. The current standard, 3.1, is presented by the PCI Security Standards Council as focusing on 12 requirements in 6 areas. And so, secure the network and systems development and maintenance. And so it gives descriptions there of things. Card holder data protection. As you can see, steps 3 and 4 need to be in compliance. Vulnerability management program maintenance. There's number 5 and 6. So you have 3 different categories, but 6 mandatory steps that have to be. If you want to use a credit card, one of the major credit cards, MasterCard, Visa, American Express, Discover, any of those, then you have to meet these particular requirements before they'll even do business with you. And so strong access control measures, implementation, network monitoring and testing, information security policy maintenance. So the benefits of PCI DSS compliance as promoted by the PCI Security Standards Council include an assertion that systems processing payment cards are secure, promoting trust in customers. And so you can see, and even all the way down to increased efficiency of the information infrastructure. Okay, so as you can see here, we've moved on up here to the Australian high-tech crime. High-tech crimes are defined and prosecuted in Australia under its Commonwealth legislation, Part 10.7, Computer Offences and Criminal Code Act 1995. The law specifically includes data system intrusion such as hacking, unauthorized destruction or modification of data. You got your denial of service attacks, and you have the distributed denial of service attacks using botnets and those type things. The creation and distribution of malicious software. So now we're going to talk about state and local regulations. So basically, if you're an information security professional, it's your responsibility to understand state laws and regulations and ensure that their organization's security policies and procedures comply with the laws and regulations. For instance, the state law, the Georgia state law, Georgia Computer Systems Protection Act, has various computer security provisions and establishes specific penalties for use of information technology to attack or exploit information systems and organizations. And of course, you can see the Georgia identity theft law requires that a business may not discard a record containing personal information unless it shreds, erases, modifies, or otherwise makes the information irretrievable. So, policy versus law. A lot of times people seem to think that this is interchangeable. The key difference between policy and law is that ignorance of policy is an acceptable defense. Therefore, policies must be distributed to all individuals who are expected to comply with them, readily available for employees' reference, easily understood. If you're writing a policy for your organization, don't try to be like Matlock or some type of lawyer and put it in all kind of legal jargon that people can't understand. And here it even mentions the multilingual translations and for visually impaired or low literacy employees. You also want those policies acknowledged by the employee, and basically by consent of a signed form. Some companies have the AUPs that have to be signed. And so basically you also want the policies uniformly enforced for all employees. So some define ethics as the organizational study of how humans ought to act. Others define it as a set of rules we should live by. And basically, as an information security student, you're not basically expected to study the topic of ethics in a vacuum, but within a larger ethical framework. But those employed in the area of information security may be expected to be more articulate about the topic than others in the organization, and often must withstand a higher degree of scrutiny. Case in point, just because you have administrative rights and you work on the network team doesn't mean that you have the rights to visit websites that the other common users or basic employees without admin rights, if they have to sign an AUP stating, okay, you cannot go to these websites of pornography or stream unauthorized music or pirated software, those type things, you must, basically, you're expected to operate at a higher ethical standard than the people that are supposed to be following it as well. You're supposed to lead by example. Let's talk about the frameworks of ethics, the normative ethics, the study of what makes actions right or wrong, also known as moral theory, that is, how should people act. Meta-ethics is the study of the meaning of ethical judgments and properties. And so basically what's right. Descriptive ethics is the study of the choices that have been made by individuals in the past. And of course, you have the applied ethics, which is an approach that applies moral codes to actions drawn from realistic situations. The deontological ethics is basically the study of the rightness or wrongness of intentions and motives as opposed to the rightness and wrongness of the consequences, also known as duty-based or obligation-based ethics. And basically this approach seeks to define a person's ethical duty. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. Many of you will see this in the supplemental data in Module 2. I'll provide these slides as well. Now, this is something I want you to know. The 10 Commandments of Computer Ethics. Thou shalt not use a computer to harm other people, interfere with other people's computer work. So you need to be familiar with these. So the ethics in education, the importance of education in leveling the ethical perceptions in a small population. Basically, employees must be trained and kept up to date on information security topics, including the expected behaviors of an ethical employee. And so also, proper ethical and legal training is vital to creating an informed, well-prepared, and low-risk system user. And this goes back to the topic that I mentioned a bit earlier, is train your workforce. If you don't want things to happen, train your workforce, develop policies that are easily understood by the users, and that they're maintainable, they're manageable. And so there are certain freedoms on the job. I know some people, on Christmas time or somebody's birthday, they might go out on the web and browse for a gift and buy a product online. And so it sort of goes back to the discussion topic that we have this week is cyber slacking. Those are the people that, basically spend, say, 90% of their day at work on Facebook, Twitter, surfing the web, read news articles, anything but doing the actual work. And so those are cyber slackers. And but basically, it's okay for, in my opinion, it's okay for an employee to go out on the web temporarily to buy a gift or because it's almost a two-edged sword. If you have a policy that says they can't do that, then that person has no choice but to take off work and leave work to go buy that gift, and so it takes away from the time that could be spent there doing actual work. So I'd rather somebody, instead of walking 10 minutes to their car, 20-minute drive to wherever, and then an hour shopping, there's an hour and a half already, and these two have to come back to work. So a person has wasted 2 hours or more that could have, had they been able to go online and purchase these things, on a secure website, legitimate company, those type of things, Amazon, eBay, any number of those sites, Walmart.com, Target, you name it. With a few clicks of a button and maybe 10 or 15 minutes of browsing, they're done with their shopping and then go on with their work. So, in my opinion, I think it would be okay for a person to do some personal shopping, while on the job. But don't take advantage of that. Just because some companies may allow it, don't take advantage. And so basically, deterring unethical and illegal behavior is the responsibility of information security personnel to deter unethical and illegal acts through the use of policy, education, training, and technology controls and safeguards. And there's basically three general categories of unethical behavior, and organizations in society should seek to eliminate ignorance, accidents, and the intent. So how do we deter unethical and illegal behavior? Deterrence is the best method of preventing an illegal or unethical activity. Laws, policies, and technical controls are all examples of deterrence. However, it is generally agreed that laws and policies and their associated penalties only deter if three conditions are present. Number one, the fear of the penalty. Like if I do this, then here's my consequence, and they will punish me for this. Probability of being caught, and the probability of penalty being administered. It's like, say old Bob's been with the company for 30 years and he's never been in trouble, and he goes out to a website he's not supposed to. The probability of the penalty being administered to him is probably little to none, based on his past behavior. And maybe he didn't know what was going on, so old Bob may get off the hook. Whereas Charlie, for example, may go to the same website, but has been caught like 4 other times doing that, and the other 3 times the penalty wasn't administered. He kept getting a slap on the wrist, but this time the penalty's being administered. And so Charlie had a lack of the fear of penalty, and he was going betting against the odds. The probability of being caught was slim to none. So you have employees on both sides of the spectrum there. Professional organizations, their codes of ethics. I'm not going to touch a whole lot on these. You'll see the PowerPoint slides, and you can read them for yourself in many of these. The Association of Computing Machinery, the ACM, is a respected professional society originally established in 1947 as the world's first educational and scientific computing society. One of the few organizations that strongly promotes education and provides discounted memberships for students. And basically, the Association of Computing Machinery Code of Ethics requires members to perform their duties in a manner befitting an ethical computing professional. The International Information System Security Certification Consortium, the Code of Ethics put forth by ISC Squared, is primarily designed for information security professionals who have earned one of their certifications. This code includes 4 mandatory canons, and if you take an IC certification, ISC Squared exam or certification, then you'll actually have to adhere to the code, the mandatory canons, and you'll be asked on your exam, more than likely, they will give you a blurb of the code, and you have to determine whether it's a correct statement or not. So you pretty much have to memorize the mandatory canons and know these things. So these are good things to know. The SANS Institute, basically founded in 1989, it's a professional research and education cooperative organization with over 156,000 security professionals, auditors, systems, and network administrators. The SANS GIAC Global Information Assurance Certification Code of Ethics requires something similar to the ISC squared canon. ISACA is a professional association with a focus on auditing, control, and security. The membership comprises both technical and managerial professionals. ISACA also has a code of ethics for its professionals. It requires many of the same high standards for ethical performance as the other organizations and certifications. And you can read the benefits of the ISACA certification holders here. ISSA, Information Systems Security Association, it's basically a non-profit society of information security professionals. As a professional association, its primary mission is to bring together qualified practitioners of information security for information exchange and educational development. ISSA provides conferences, meetings, publications, and information resources to promote information security awareness and education. It also promotes a code of ethics similar to that of ISC squared, ISACA, and the ACM, basically promoting management practices that will ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of organizational information resources. Yeah, so let's talk about this one, the organizational liability and need for counsel. Yeah, that one's okay, so the organizational liability and the need for counsel. What if an organization does not support or even encourage strong ethical conduct on the part of its employees? You know, what if an organization does not behave ethically? If an employee acting with or without the authorization performs an illegal or unethical act causing some degree of harm, the organization can be held financially liable for that action. So, key law enforcement agencies, the FBI, we all know about the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Their InfraGard program promotes efforts to educate, train, inform, and involve the business and public sector in information security. And so basically every FBI field office has established an InfraGard chapter and collaborates with public and private organizations and the academic community to share information about attacks, you know, and the vulnerabilities and the threats. And so basically the InfraGard's dominant contribution is the free exchange of information. The National Security Agency, the NSA, is the nation's cryptologic organization. I think most everybody's familiar with the NSA. You also have the U.S. Secret Service. You know, basically it's a department within the Department of the Treasury. In addition to its well-known mission to protect key members of the U.S. government, the Secret Service is also charged with the detection and arrest of any person committing a U.S. federal offense relating to computer fraud, as well as false identification crimes. And just a tidbit, you know, when was the Secret Service initiated? Well, it was initiated by Abraham Lincoln. And you'd have thought that, hey, well, if he had Secret Service back then why weren't they on the detail and, you know, protecting him? Well, as it says here, the U.S. Secret Service is a department within the Department of the Treasury. So basically, Abraham Lincoln, when he established the U.S. Secret Service, the intent was to keep down counterfeit money and have agents available, revenuers and those type people from the Department of the Treasury to go out and make sure there were no counterfeit money and basically protect our currencies. So it's just an interesting tidbit there. The Department of Homeland Security was established with the passage of Public Law 107296, which is in part transferred the United States Secret Service from the Department of the Treasury to the Department of Homeland Security. So, in summary, laws are formally adopted rules for accepted behavior in modern society. Ethics are socially acceptable behaviors. The key difference between laws and ethics is that laws bear the sanction of a governing authority and ethics do not. Organizations formalize desired behaviors in documents called policies. Civil law encompasses a wide variety of laws that regulate relationships between and among individuals and organizations. And so the desire to protect national security, trade secrets, and a variety of other state and private assets has led to several laws affecting what information and information management and security resources may be exported from the United States. We all know about the U.S. copyright laws. Not going to spend a lot of time on that. But deterrence can prevent an illegal or unethical activity from occurring. Successful deterrence requires the institution of severe penalties, the probability of apprehension, and an expectation that penalties will be enforced. And lastly, and not least, as part of an effort to sponsor positive ethics, a number of professional organizations have established codes of conduct and or codes of ethics that their members are expected to follow. And we mentioned those: ISC Squared, ISSA, the SANS GAIAC Institute. And basically the number of key U.S. federal agencies are charged with the protection of American information resources and the investigation of threats to or attacks on these resources. And so I know I babbled a lot and I read a lot of the slides, but this chapter is pretty self-explanatory. It's direct. There's no tricks or anything, but there is a lot of information that you must know. Know the statutory laws, know the regulatory laws, and it's a good thing to know your Constitution, because the Constitution applies to all of those no matter what. So a statutory law cannot supersede the Constitution. It must be constitutionally sound, and so a lot of these statutory laws that go through should be run through judicial review to make sure that it is constitutional and doesn't violate the rights of the U.S. citizen. So those are things that you need to know in this chapter. The self-test is out there. You have your first discussion this week based on cyber slacking. I'm interested to know your points of view on that, and I'll be monitoring those this week and probably reply back and forth to you. So wish you good luck this week, and if you need anything, please do not hesitate to contact me during office hours. This week they're Tuesday from 10 to 2, Wednesday 10 to 1, Thursday 10 to 1. And so office number is 256-216-5366. And of course you can always reach me through email. I used to respond less than 24 hours. But for some reason, please allow up to 24 hours as a professional courtesy if you haven't heard from me in a couple hours anyway. But if you need something and it's an emergency, don't wait till the last minute and say, hey, I need to take the quiz or I need to take the midterm exam and it's 3 hours to finish and you're just now starting on it and you can't get in or something. But give me a heads up and I'll try to do the same for you guys. And if nothing else, I believe that's all I've got. And again, if you need me, feel free to contact me.